A little girl, no more than 10, clutched her baby brother tight in trembling arms, her sobs breaking through the winter night. Behind her, a man, her father, drunk and furious, hurled her suitcase into the snow, shouting words that should never be said to a child. And just then, a figure appeared by the gate, a police officer, frozen in disbelief, his hand hovering near his badge. Beside him, a German shepherd growled, then barked, a deep, thunderous sound that shook the air, as if the dog itself could no longer bear the cruelty before its eyes. Where are you watching from tonight? Let us know in the comments. And if stories of courage and compassion touch your heart, don't forget to subscribe and share this video. May your day be warm, your heart be kind, and may you never forget. Sometimes the smallest souls carry the greatest strength. The town of Pine Hollow lay swallowed beneath winter's white silence, the kind that seemed to hush even the wind. Nestled between frozen pine ridges and a river locked in ice, it looked like a postcard from another century, charming from afar, but cold and cracked when seen up close. Smoke curled lazily from chimney tops, and the air tasted faintly of iron, of frost, and of wood smoke. It was the kind of morning when nothing should move outside, and yet, from one lonely house at the end of Birchwood Lane, came the sound of shouting. Jack Mullins was a man of 38, whose face had been handsome once, before the liquor carved its signature into the corners of his mouth and under his eyes. He stood in the doorway, a half-empty bottle still gripped in one hand, his breath steaming in the cold. The uniform of a mechanic clung to his tall but slouching frame, stained by years of grease and regret. He had once been known for his laughter, a kind man after the death of his first wife, but grief had soured that kindness into something brittle. When his second wife, Veronica, arrived with her expensive perfume and easy smile, the neighbors had whispered that she saved him. But no one knew how quickly that smile could turn to glass. "Get out!" Jack roared, his voice rough with drink. "I don't want to see that cursed face again." Before him, in the snow, stood Clara, a girl of 8 with hair the color of chestnuts and a face marked by a bright red birthmark stretching from her cheek to her temple, like a flame someone forgot to blow out. Her coat was too thin, her boots mismatched, and in her trembling arms she held a baby boy no older than 8 months. Ben, the infant, was bundled in a faded blue blanket, his face flushed from crying, his tiny hands clutching at his sister's collar as though she were his entire world. "Please, Daddy," Clara begged, her voice shaking so hard it almost broke the air. "I'll be good. I'll do all the chores. I'll take care of Ben. Please don't make us leave." Behind Jack, Veronica appeared. She was 35, tall and striking, her golden hair twisted perfectly atop her head, a silk robe clinging to her figure even in the cold. But there was nothing warm in her beauty. Her pale blue eyes gleamed like frost. Once a receptionist at the town's only bank, Veronica had learned early that power was easier to steal than to earn. She had married Jack for comfort, not love, and saw in Clara nothing but the reflection of a woman she could never surpass, the dead wife whose kindness haunted the house. "Let her go," Veronica said, her voice dripping with satisfaction. "She's a burden, Jack. You're only making things worse keeping her here." Jack's jaw tightened. For a heartbeat, something flickered in his expression, a shadow of doubt, maybe guilt. But it passed like a cloud across the moon. He tossed the bottle aside, its shattering echoing through the cold yard, and turned his back. "Take your cursed luck with you," he muttered and disappeared into the warmth of the house. Veronica smirked and stepped forward. "Be grateful, little one. I'm letting you keep the blanket." Then she closed the door with a slow, deliberate click that sounded more final than any scream. Clara stood frozen. Her small body shook, not just from the cold, but from disbelief. Around her, the snow kept falling, soft, indifferent. She sank to her knees, gathering the scattered clothes from the ground with numb fingers. Ben whimpered, pressing his face against her chest. "Don't cry," she whispered, though tears streamed freely down her cheeks. "I'll find a place for us. I promise." She tried to lift the suitcase again, but it was too heavy for her thin arms. The world tilted. Her breath came out in visible gasps. She looked once more at the door, hoping it might open, hoping for her father's silhouette to appear, but nothing moved inside. Only the faint laughter of Veronica drifted through the wall, muffled but cruel. The road beyond the yard was nothing but white. The town was still a mile away, and the snow was deep enough to swallow her boots with every step. She shifted Ben higher in her arms and began to walk. Hours might have passed, or maybe just minutes. Time moved differently in the cold. The wind picked up, biting at her face, tugging at her hair. Her vision blurred, and her arms ached. Just as her knees began to buckle, a low growl cut through the wind. From the haze ahead emerged a large, dark shape. It moved slowly at first, cautious, then faster as it saw her stumble. The growl turned into a sharp bark. A German shepherd bounded into view, its coat a mix of sable and ash gray, powerful legs slicing through the snow. Its left ear bore a faint scar, and one eye, the right, was cloudy with an old injury. Despite that, it moved with steady confidence, muscles rippling beneath the fur. This was Rex, 7 years old, a retired police dog once awarded for bravery before a blast in a warehouse left him partially deaf and scarred. He was loyal, alert, and fiercely protective, a soldier of instinct and honor. Behind Rex came a man, tall and broad-shouldered, dressed in a navy blue patrol jacket dusted with snow. His boots crunched against the frozen ground, his breath forming clouds in the pale air. His name was Officer Luke Harrison, 36, a police officer of Pine Hollow's small precinct. His face was rough-hewn, with deep-set gray-blue eyes that carried both strength and weariness. A faint scar traced the edge of his jaw, a remnant from his time in the military before he joined the force. His dark hair, flecked with gray, was damp with melted snow. Luke was not a man easily shaken. Widowed for 3 years after his wife, a nurse named Evelyn, died during a hospital fire, he had built his life on routine, morning patrol, quiet dinners, long silences. He spoke little, worked much, and lived with the quiet company of Rex in a small cabin near the forest. Pine Hollow knew him as the man who helped everyone but kept no one close. Now he stood before the sight of a girl half buried in snow, clutching a baby. The scene hit him like a ghost from another life. "Hey!" he called out, kneeling beside her. "Hey, sweetheart, you're freezing. What happened?" Clara tried to answer, but her lips were too stiff to move. Only a broken whisper came out. "Please, help. My brother." Luke's gaze softened. He slid off his thick patrol coat and wrapped it around the children, then lifted them both into his arms as if they weighed nothing. Rex circled them, barking once, then fell in step beside his master. "Easy now," Luke murmured, his breath fogging the air. "You're safe, all right? I've got you." They reached his patrol truck parked by the roadside. Inside, the heater hummed to life. Luke checked the baby's pulse, steady though weak. Then he looked at the girl, whose eyes, large and dark, blinked up at him with fragile trust. "What's your name?" he asked. "See, Clara," she stammered. "And this is Ben." Luke nodded slowly. "Well, Clara, I'm Officer Harrison. You can call me Luke if you'd like, and this here is Rex." At the sound of his name, the German shepherd turned, his intelligent gaze meeting hers. Hesitant, Clara reached out a trembling hand. Rex sniffed her fingers, then gently licked them. She let out a tiny gasp, half surprise, half relief. For the first time that morning, something inside her loosened. "See," Luke said, almost smiling. "He likes you. That means you're one of the good ones." Outside, the storm deepened. Luke started the engine, steering the truck toward town. The snow blurred the road, but he drove slow and steady. Clara leaned her head against the seat, her eyelids fluttering. In the rearview mirror, Luke caught her reflection. Pale, exhausted, yet somehow still holding the baby, with a protective fierceness that made his chest ache. Rex rested his head on her knee. The dog's body was warm, his rhythmic breathing steady, like a lullaby. The girl's shivering slowed. When they reached the police station, most of the lights were off. It was Sunday, quiet, empty. Luke carried the children inside, laying them on the bench near the heater. The faint hum of warmth filled the silence. Clara stirred, whispering, "We didn't do anything bad, did we?" Luke shook his head. "No, sweetheart, you didn't. Sometimes bad things happen because of other people's mistakes, not ours." Her eyes closed, and for the first time since she'd been thrown out, she slept. Rex lay beside the bench, his tail curled, eyes watchful. Luke stood over them, rubbing his temples. He'd seen cruelty in his years on the force, but something about this, the tiny hand of the baby clutching his sleeve, the girl's scarlet mark glowing softly in the light, unraveled something inside him. He pulled a thin blanket from the supply cabinet, covered them carefully, then sat down across the room, his elbows on his knees, staring into the orange glow of the heater. Snow drifted outside the window, quiet and endless. For the first time in years, Luke Harrison whispered a prayer, not for himself, but for the two strangers who had stumbled into his life from the heart of the storm. And Rex, sensing something shift in his master's heartbeat, gave a low, contented sigh before closing his one good eye. The night settled over Pine Hollow like a secret, holding them all in its fragile, frozen grace. Morning broke slow and gray over Pine Hollow. The storm had calmed, leaving behind a silence so deep it almost rang in the ears. The police station stood at the edge of town, a modest brick building half buried in snow, its roof sagging under the white weight of the night's fall. From the outside, it looked deserted, but from within came the faint hum of an old radiator and the low breathing of two sleeping children. Officer Luke Harrison sat slumped at his desk, a paper cup of coffee gone cold in his hands. His uniform jacket hung from the back of his chair, and fatigue carved deeper lines across his face. Across the room, under a wool blanket, Clara and Ben slept side by side on the wooden bench, their faces turned toward the heater's glow. Rex, the German shepherd, lay curled beside them like a living sentinel, his fur catching the light in patches of silver and ash gray. Every now and then, his ears twitched at distant sounds, the drip of melting snow, the faint creak of the roof, the echo of wind through the vents. Luke had not slept all night. He had spent the hours between dawn and reason thinking about the red mark on the girl's face, the way she had whispered her name like an apology, and how she had held the baby as though the world depended on her tiny arms. Something inside him, long sealed by grief, had begun to stir. The door opened with a squeal of cold hinges. A woman stepped in, brushing snow from her coat. Sergeant Miller, the day shift officer, was in her early 50s, sturdy and practical, her hair cropped short and streaked with gray. She had a face that could look both stern and kind, depending on the moment, and eyes that saw more than most people wish they would. She stopped short at the sight of the children, then shot Luke a sharp look. "Luke Harrison," she said, setting her gloves on the counter. "You planning to start a daycare in here?" Luke ran a hand down his face. "Found them out by Birchwood Lane last night. The girl was half frozen, said her name's Clara, the baby's Ben." Miller's voice softened despite herself. "Parents?" He shook his head. "No word yet. The girl said her father made her leave. The rest—" He gestured vaguely toward the sleeping pair. Miller sighed, rubbing her temple. "You know protocol. We're supposed to contact child services." Luke's jaw flexed. "I know, but they wouldn't survive another night in that shelter. You've seen the place." The sergeant hesitated. She had worked long enough to know he was right. Pine Hollow's social system was as cold as its winters, overworked, underfunded, and mostly indifferent. After a long silence, she muttered, "All right, just for today. But don't get attached." Luke gave a faint smile. "You know me. I don't get attached." But they both knew that wasn't true anymore. An hour later, the children woke. Clara blinked against the morning, light, confusion clouding her features until memory struck. She clutched Ben closer, eyes darting around the unfamiliar room. Then she saw Rex, tail thumping lazily against the floor, and relaxed just a little. "Good morning," Luke said, approaching with a paper cup of cocoa. "It's warm, careful, it's sweet." She hesitated before accepting it. Her fingers trembled, but she didn't spill. Ben, in her lap, gurgled softly, his little hand reaching toward Luke's badge, fascinated by the glint. "Where are we?" she asked quietly. "The police station," Luke replied. "You're safe here." Her eyes flickered with something between disbelief and relief. "Will Daddy come?" Luke paused. "I don't think so. Not right now." She nodded slowly, staring into the cocoa. "He said I bring bad luck." Rex rose, patted over, and rested his heavy head on her knee. Clara smiled faintly and touched his muzzle. "He doesn't think so," Luke said. Before he could say more, the door burst open again, ushering in a gust of cold wind and the scent of cheap perfume. A young woman in a bright red coat stumbled inside. Her makeup was smudged from tears, and her thin fingers clutched a file folder. Emma Calder, the town's social worker, barely 28, was the sort who looked like she should be teaching kindergarten rather than wrestling with the misery of neglected children. She was short, with tired brown eyes and soft freckles across her nose. "Officer Harrison," she said between breaths. "I got your message. The snow delayed me. Roads are a mess." Her eyes landed on Clara. "Oh, honey." Clara flinched, shrinking back instinctively. Luke stepped in subtly, his body a quiet barrier. "Easy, Emma. She's scared." Emma nodded and crouched down, lowering her voice. "That's okay, sweetheart. I just want to make sure you and your brother are warm. Can you tell me your full name?" Clara looked at Luke for permission. When he nodded, she whispered, "Clara Mullins." Emma scribbled quickly. "And your dad?" Clara's throat tightened. He told us to go away." Luke saw Emma's expression harden. He knew that look, the weary outrage of someone who'd seen too many children thrown away like garbage. "Well," Emma said softly, "you're not alone anymore, Clara. We'll take care of you." Clara said nothing, only looked down at Rex, who wagged his tail once as if confirming it. By afternoon, the sky outside had turned pale gold. Snowflakes drifted lazily, the kind that looked almost soft enough to forgive. Emma had left to file paperwork, promising to return tomorrow with proper arrangements. Luke doubted that meant anything good. He sat at his desk again, watching Clara draw on a scrap of paper he'd given her. She wasn't drawing houses or trees like most children. She was sketching Rex. Her lines were careful, almost reverent. The dog himself lay nearby, pretending to nap but keeping one eye open. His loyalty already shifted to this small human who smelled of sorrow and cocoa. "Rex likes you," Luke said. Clara looked up shyly. "He's brave. He didn't bark when I was scared." Luke smiled. "He's been through worse than most people. Lost his hearing in one ear during an explosion a few years back. Saved 3 officers. He doesn't scare easy." Clara nodded as if understanding that completely. "Maybe he's like me," she said after a pause. "People look and think something's wrong, but it's just a mark." The words caught Luke off guard. He looked at her, at that bright scarlet birthmark blazing against her pale skin, and suddenly felt ashamed of every adult who had made her believe it was a curse. Before he could reply, the station phone rang. Luke picked it up, his tone turning clipped. "Pine Hollow PD." A male voice crackled on the other end. "Harrison, it's Chief Warren. I heard you brought in a kid last night. You know that's out of procedure." Luke straightened. "Yes, sir. She was abandoned in the snow. I couldn't leave her. Child Services handles that. You know the drill. I want them transferred first thing in the morning." "Yes, sir," Luke said, though his jaw clenched so hard it hurt. When the line went dead, Clara was looking at him, wide-eyed. "Are we in trouble?" He forced a small smile. "No, kiddo, not this time." That night, the station was quieter than usual. The heater hissed and popped. Clara lay curled under the blanket again, Ben asleep beside her. Rex slept on the floor, his head near her hand. Luke stood by the window, looking out at the snow-covered street. Somewhere beyond it, he imagined Veronica and the drunk father, their house warm, their hearts cold. He turned back when he heard a sound, a faint sniffle. Clara was awake, tears glistening in her eyes. "I dreamed the snow took Ben," she whispered. "It covered him, and I couldn't find him." Luke knelt beside her, his voice low. "Dreams can't hurt us. You've got Rex here, and me too. No one's taking your brother." Clara hesitated, then nodded, clutching his sleeve as if testing whether he would pull away. He didn't. Her small hand stayed there, and slowly her breathing evened. When he stood again, he saw Rex lift his head and meet his gaze. The dog's eyes seemed to say something Luke already knew. Don't let them go. Outside, the snow began to fall again, quiet and endless, wrapping the station in a pale glow that made it look almost like a home. The next morning came gray and hollow, a sky of dull pewter pressing low over Pine Hollow. The snow that had blanketed the streets the night before had hardened overnight, crunching like broken glass beneath the boots of early risers. Inside the small police station, the air smelled of burnt coffee and old paperwork, a tired scent that clung to the walls like memory. Officer Luke Harrison sat at his desk, a stack of forms spread before him. His handwriting, neat yet tense, filled the pages as he documented the incident. An abandoned child, no injuries beyond mild frostbite, no known next of kin, confirmed. His pen hovered each time he wrote the word abandoned. Something about it refused to settle easily on the page. Across the room, Clara sat cross-legged on the bench near the heater, feeding her baby brother Ben from a warm bottle Luke had found in the evidence fridge. The baby's cheeks were flushed now, his small eyes following the beam of morning light cutting across the floor. Clara herself looked steadier, though her expression carried the quiet alertness of a child who had learned to expect the worst. Beside her, Rex rested his head on his paws, his tail sweeping the floor whenever Ben gurgled or giggled. Luke finished signing the report just as the front door creaked open. The man who entered was tall, lean, and impeccably dressed for someone visiting a rural station. Dark gray overcoat, polished shoes, leather gloves. His name was Eli Stone, the county attorney, and there was a cold sort of charm about him. His hair, slicked back with too much precision, shone like wet coal. His smile was practiced, quick, and without warmth. People said Eli had never lost a case, but others whispered it wasn't because he was good, only because he was ruthless. "Officer Harrison," he greeted smoothly, removing his gloves one finger at a time. "Heard you took in some stray kids last night." Luke stood, shoulders tightening. "They're not strays. They were left in the snow." Eli smiled faintly. "Semantics. The girl's stepmother called this morning. Says you kidnapped her husband's children." Clara froze, gripping Ben tighter. Luke saw the terror flicker in her eyes, and something sharp twisted in his gut. "They were abandoned," he said firmly. "I found them half dead in a snowbank." Eli's tone remained calm, too calm. "That may be, but unless you've got proof, it's her word against yours. You might want to watch your step, officer. The sheriff's been getting complaints about how you run things around here." Luke said nothing. He had learned long ago that men like Eli Stone fed on reaction. The attorney straightened his coat, gave one last glance at Clara, something between disinterest and disdain, and walked out, the scent of expensive cologne lingering long after the door shut. For a moment, the only sound was Ben's quiet sucking on the bottle. Then Clara whispered, "He works with her, doesn't he?" Luke nodded slowly. "Yeah, and we'll make sure he doesn't get near you again." The words felt like a promise, and even Rex's ears perked up, as if he'd heard the vow too. Later that afternoon, while the station slept in its usual lull, Luke retreated to the file room, a cramped, windowless space that smelled of paper, dust, and secrets. The shelves bowed under decades of forgotten reports. He searched for anything related to Mullins, the surname Clara had given. It took nearly an hour before his fingers brushed a folder marked Fire Incident, 2015. The file was thin, its corners frayed. Inside were photos of a burned apartment and a brief report. Fire caused by faulty wiring. One casualty. Evelyn Mullins, nurse, age 29. Survived by husband Jack Mullins and daughter Clara. Luke's breath caught. Evelyn. That name? He hadn't spoken it aloud in years. Because Evelyn Mullins had once saved his life. He remembered the explosion vividly, a warehouse raid gone wrong, smoke thick as fog, the world screaming in flame. He had been trapped under collapsed beams, his leg crushed, the heat so intense his vision went white. And then a woman's voice, calm, steady, cutting through the chaos. "You're going to make it, Officer Harrison. Hold on." She had bandaged his leg, dragged him out, and disappeared into the ambulance lights. He'd never learned her name, until now. Evelyn Mullins, Clara's mother. Luke sat back, heart hammering. Fate, it seemed, had a cruel sense of irony. The daughter of the woman who once saved him had stumbled back into his life, carrying a baby and a birthmark and the same kind of quiet courage. "Luke?" The voice came from the doorway. It was Martha Cole, the station's janitor. A woman in her 60s with a limp and a permanent scowl that softened only when she spoke to animals. Her gray hair was pinned messily beneath a knit cap, and her clothes smelled faintly of bleach and peppermint. People in town called her Martha the Mumbler because she always talked to herself while working, but Luke had known her long enough to see past that reputation. Martha noticed things no one else did. "You look like you've seen a ghost," she said, resting her mop against the doorframe. "Maybe I have," Luke replied quietly. Martha squinted. "It's about that girl, isn't it? The one with the red mark." Luke frowned. "What do you know about her?" Martha hesitated, glancing over her shoulder, as if afraid the walls might be listening. "I used to work at the bank before cleaning here. Her stepmother, Veronica Mullins, still has a safety deposit box there, comes in every month, always pays cash, always nervous. People say she's hiding something. I say she's hiding someone's money." Luke leaned forward. "You're sure about this?" "I've lived long enough to know when guilt smells stronger than perfume," Martha said, a flash of dry humor in her voice. "Watch that woman, Luke. She's got the devil's patience." He nodded slowly, filing her words away. Martha left with her mop, muttering something about truth having long legs but a slow gait. When he returned to the main room, evening had already begun to fall. The heater buzzed softly, throwing light across the floor where Clara was sitting. She was reading an old children's book Miller had brought earlier, The Wind in the Willows. Her lips moved silently as she traced each line with her finger. Rex lay beside her, chin resting on her knee, his tail sweeping lazily. "Officer Luke?" she asked without looking up. "Was my mom good?" Luke froze. "Why do you ask that?" "Because the lady, Veronica, said she wasn't. She said Mom left because she couldn't stand me." Luke swallowed hard, his throat tight. "Your mother was a hero, Clara. She saved lives. She saved mine." Clara's eyes widened, her small mouth opening in surprise. "She saved you?" He nodded. "A long time ago, and I think she'd be proud of you for taking care of Ben the way you do." Clara's face softened, her shoulders easing. She reached for Ben's tiny hand and whispered something Luke couldn't hear. But the words, whatever they were, made Rex lift his head and thump his tail against the floor twice, a sound like approval. Luke stood there watching them, a strange warmth rising in his chest. It wasn't joy exactly, but something close, a sense that maybe, just maybe, this broken little family could still find its way towards something whole. Outside, snow began to fall again, light and soundless. Somewhere beyond the quiet streets, Veronica Mullins poured herself a glass of wine and smiled as she dialed Eli Stone's number. Inside the police station, Luke sat by the heater, reading the report again under the dim lamplight, and decided that no matter what came next, he would not let history repeat itself. The wind returned to Pine Hollow that night, rattling the station windows like a warning. The storm had thinned into a slow, relentless drizzle of snow, the kind that lingered for days and whispered through every crack in the wall. Officer Luke Harrison stayed late at his desk, the dim lamp throwing a lonely pool of light over the paperwork he wasn't really reading. His thoughts kept circling back to the file in his drawer. Evelyn Mullins, deceased. Her name felt heavy every time he saw it, like the echo of a life unfinished. On the bench near the heater, Clara slept sitting up, her head tilted against the back wall. Ben, her baby brother, rested in her lap, his soft breaths rising and falling beneath the blanket. Rex, ever the guardian, lay stretched out before them, his head propped on his front paws, eyes half closed but watchful. Every so often, his ears flicked at the faint hum of the wind or the distant clatter of pipes. Luke rubbed his eyes, exhaustion dragging at him, when a sharp knock cut through the stillness. He looked up to see Martha Cole standing at the doorway. The janitor, small and round-shouldered in her patched winter coat, snow melting on her boots. Her gray hair peeked from under a red knit hat that had probably been handmade decades ago. She clutched a paper envelope to her chest like it was something fragile. "You're still here?" Luke asked, glancing at the clock. It was nearly midnight. "Couldn't sleep," Martha replied, her voice rough but steady. "Thought you might want to see this." She shuffled closer, her limp more pronounced tonight, and laid the envelope on his desk. Luke frowned, opening it carefully. Inside were several black and white photocopies, bank receipts, old legal forms, and a signature he recognized immediately. Veronica Mullins. "Where'd you get these?" he asked. "I told you I used to work at the bank," Martha said, lowering herself onto the visitor chair with a grunt. "Those copies shouldn't even exist, but some folks still owe me favors. I pulled what I could before anyone noticed. See that signature? That's dated a week after Evelyn Mullins died. Looks like Veronica transferred the insurance money to a private account, one that doesn't list her husband as a co-owner." Luke scanned the papers. "So she took the widow's money before it could reach the kids." "Exactly," Martha said, rubbing her palms together for warmth. "And now she's trying to cover her tracks. People don't change much when they're greedy." Luke exhaled slowly, setting the papers aside. "You shouldn't have taken this risk, Martha. If the bank finds out—" "They won't," she interrupted. "I might talk too much, but I'm not stupid." She gave a faint grin, revealing the soft side beneath her gruffness. "Besides, someone's got to stand up for that little girl. I've seen too many kids chewed up and forgotten by this town. I'm too old to watch another one disappear." Luke looked toward Clara, still sleeping soundly beside the heater. He nodded. "Then we're on the same side." Martha's eyes softened. "You're a good man, Luke. Maybe the last one's still trying to fix something broken." Before Luke could reply, a phone rang sharply across the room. The sound startled Ben, who began to cry, and Clara stirred awake, blinking groggily. Luke crossed the room quickly, lifting the receiver. "Pine Hollow PD," he said. A cold, familiar voice answered. "Eli Stone." "Evening, Officer Harrison. I hear you've been busy playing detective. Thought I'd remind you there are procedures for these things." Luke's grip tightened on the receiver. "If you're calling about the kids, they're safe." "That's not your call to make," Eli replied smoothly. "Veronica Mullins has already filed for custody. A hearing will be scheduled soon. I suggest you prepare to cooperate. It'll save you the embarrassment of losing your badge." "Those kids were abandoned," Luke said through gritted teeth. "You think any court would hand them back to her?" Eli chuckled softly. "In this county, with the right story, anything's possible." The line went dead. Luke set the receiver down slowly, the anger simmering beneath his calm exterior. Clara watched him from across the room, her wide eyes uncertain. "Is it the bad man again?" she asked quietly. He forced a small smile. "Something like that. Don't worry, we'll handle it." But inside, he knew things were turning fast. Eli was moving pieces behind the scenes, and Luke didn't have much time before the law turned against him. The next morning, the snow finally stopped. Pale sunlight broke through the clouds, glinting off the frozen windows. Clara was awake early, sitting cross-legged on the floor, feeding Ben with a bottle while humming softly. The same lullaby Luke hadn't heard since Evelyn's funeral. It made him pause in the doorway for a moment before heading to the kitchen for coffee. He was halfway through his mug when the station door opened again, this time revealing Sergeant Miller. Her usual stoicism was tinged with unease. "Luke," she said, tossing a folded paper onto his desk. "Warrant came through from county court. They're demanding both kids be placed in child services custody until the hearing." Luke unfolded the paper. The order was signed by Judge L.M. Cartwell, a man with a reputation for taking favors from people like Eli Stone. "Effective immediately?" Luke asked. Miller nodded, her voice low. "I don't like it either, but orders are orders." From across the room, Clara looked up, sensing tension. "What's happening?" Luke forced his expression to stay neutral. "Just paperwork, kiddo." But when Miller left, he sat back heavily, staring at the document. He could already hear the echo of Veronica's laughter behind it, triumphant, poisonous. That afternoon, he drove the cruiser through Pine Hollow, the kids in the back seat, Rex perched upright beside them. Snow glittered across the rooftops, and smoke drifted from chimneys. He wasn't taking them to child services yet. Not yet. He needed time, and he needed answers. He parked outside a small white house with faded green shutters. Martha's home. The old woman opened the door before he even knocked, wrapped in a knitted shawl that looked older than both of them. "I figured you'd come," she said. "There's someone you need to meet." Inside the living room, a man sat hunched over a teacup. He was in his late 40s, balding, with kind brown eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. His hands shook slightly as he stood. "Name's Howard Briggs," he said. I was Evelyn's insurance agent. Howard explained that after Evelyn's death, the payout had been rerouted to Veronica's private account under false authorization, forged documents and all. I filed a complaint years ago, he said, voice trembling, but the case was buried. Eli Stone was the county prosecutor then. I lost my job the next month. Luke's jaw tightened. Can you prove it? Howard nodded weakly. If I can find the original claim forms, they're locked in the county archives, but someone will have to go through Stone's old files. Luke exchanged a look with Martha, who grinned like a cat catching sight of a mouse. You forget who cleans the county building, she said. I still have my old keys. For the first time all day, Luke almost smiled. Then we got a chance. They agreed to meet again after dark to retrieve the files quietly. On the way back to the station, Clara asked from the back seat, Are we in trouble, Officer Luke? He glanced at her in the mirror. No, Clara. We're going to fix something your mom didn't get the chance to. As they passed the edge of town, the horizon turned gold with the setting sun. Rex leaned his head against the window, watching the fields roll by, ears twitching to the rhythm of the road. For a moment, the car felt warm, almost peaceful, as if the world outside couldn't touch them. But Luke knew better. The storm wasn't over. It had only changed shape. The morning of the hearing arrived with a biting wind that cut through Pine Hollow like a blade. The courthouse stood on Main Street, its stone steps glazed with ice, its old flag snapping in the wind. A crowd had gathered despite the cold. Neighbors, reporters from the local paper, and curious onlookers hungry for scandal. Rumors had spread fast. A police officer defying a court order, an abandoned girl, a fortune at stake. Pine Hollow thrived on gossip, and today it was feasting. Officer Luke Harrison stood at the foot of the courthouse steps, his collar turned up against the cold. His navy blue uniform was pressed, though the wear on it showed years of service. Small scuffs on the buttons, a faint tear on one cuff. Rex, the German shepherd, walked at his side, alert and silent, his breath fogging the air. Luke's expression was unreadable, but beneath his composure was a deep unease. He had faced criminals, fires, and floods, but nothing had ever felt as fragile as what was about to happen today. Behind him walked Clara, holding baby Ben in her arms. She wore a simple brown coat borrowed from Sergeant Miller, too large for her small frame, and a red scarf Luke had found in the evidence bin. Her scarlet birthmark stood out vividly against the pale morning light, but for once she didn't try to hide it. Every step she took crunched in the frost like a declaration. Small, determined, brave. At the courthouse entrance, Martha Cole waited, wrapped in her wool shawl. She gave Luke a nod of solidarity. Beneath her arm, she carried a small folder, copies of the bank documents she had retrieved. Standing beside her was Howard Briggs, the ex-insurance agent. His overcoat hung loosely on his thin frame, his glasses fogging with every nervous breath. Everything's ready, Martha said. I even ironed my shirt, if you can believe it. Luke gave a faint smile. You look perfect, Martha, she sniffed. I always do when I'm about to cause trouble. Inside, the courthouse was colder than the air outside. The marble floors reflected the dull winter light filtering through tall windows. At the far end sat Judge Cartwell, a man in his 60s with a large frame and thinning white hair, known for his impatience and fondness for expensive cigars. His robe hung unevenly, and a faint smell of tobacco clung to it. On his left sat the clerk, a young man named Peter Lowe, who looked barely out of college and scribbled notes like he was afraid of missing a word. On the plaintiff's side sat Veronica Mullins, dressed in black, her hair in perfect curls, a string of pearls around her throat. Her beauty was carefully curated, a widow's sorrow painted into elegance. Next to her, Eli Stone leaned back in his chair, wearing a dark tailored suit and the smug confidence of a man who already believed he'd won. Luke, Clara, and their small group took their seats on the other side. The room buzzed with whispers that died the moment the gavel struck. This hearing, Judge Cartwell began, his voice booming, concerns the custody and guardianship of the minors, Clara and Benjamin Mullins. Let's proceed. Eli Stone stood smoothly, buttoning his suit jacket. Your Honor, this case is simple. The biological father and stepmother seek to regain custody of their children, who were unlawfully detained by Officer Harrison. The defendant, though a respected member of law enforcement, acted outside his authority. He turned slightly, his eyes glinting. We don't question his intentions, only his methods. Luke kept his jaw tight, saying nothing. He could feel Clara's small hand clutching his sleeve. Eli continued, his tone dripping with false sympathy. These children belong with their family. Mrs. Mullins here has expressed remorse for the misunderstanding. She was overwhelmed, grieving, and temporarily unfit. But she's ready now to resume her duties as a mother. Veronica dabbed her eyes delicately with a lace handkerchief, a gesture rehearsed to perfection. Luke's turn came. He stood, the sound of his boots echoing. Your Honor, I found Clara and her baby brother abandoned in a snowstorm, half frozen, with no adult in sight. Her stepmother never called for help, never reported them missing. She left them to die. The courtroom stirred with murmurs. Judge Cartwell tapped the gavel once. Keep your comments factual, officer. They are factual, Luke said evenly. We can produce hospital reports confirming hypothermia and neighbors who heard shouting that night. Mrs. Mullins' negligence is well documented. I acted to protect the lives of 2 children. Eli smirked. Protection or possession, Officer Harrison? Sometimes even noble men confuse the two. Martha let out a sharp snort from her seat. Oh, please, you wouldn't know noble if it bit your shiny shoes. The judge shot her a warning glare. She folded her arms, unrepentant. Just saying. Eli called his first witness, Jack Mullins, Clara's father. He stumbled to the stand wearing a cheap brown suit that didn't fit, his eyes bloodshot, his hands trembling. The smell of alcohol hung faintly around him, despite his attempt to mask it with aftershave. Mr. Mullins, Eli said gently, you've had a difficult year, haven't you? Jack nodded, his voice low. Yes, my wife died. I wasn't myself. And you made some mistakes? Yes, I shouldn't have yelled. I just didn't know how to raise them alone. Eli nodded solemnly, turning to the judge. A grieving father, temporarily lost. Hardly a crime. When it was Luke's turn to cross-examine, he approached quietly. Mr. Mullins, did you lock the door after you told your daughter to leave? Jack hesitated. I don't remember. Luke's tone sharpened. Did you hear her crying outside? Before you went to bed? Jack's shoulders sagged. I don't know. Maybe. I was drunk. A ripple of disgust swept through the courtroom. Veronica's smile faltered. Judge Cartwell leaned back, rubbing his chin. Let's proceed with caution. Emotional cases make poor judgments. At that moment, a soft sound came from the witness area. Clara stood up, still holding Ben. Her small voice carried across the silence. He said I made him ashamed. That's why he told me to go. The entire room went still. Even the judge's gavel hung suspended midair. Luke took a slow breath. He hadn't wanted her to speak, but now that she had, there was no stopping her. Clara looked straight at the judge. He said my face ruined everything, but my mom never said that. She used to kiss this mark every night and say it made me special. So, I don't think he gets to say who I belong to. Her words, pure and trembling, landed harder than any lawyer's argument. Even Eli shifted uneasily in his seat. The judge exhaled. The court will adjourn for review. Further testimony will be heard at a later date. The gavel struck, echoing like thunder. Outside, the sky had begun to snow again, thin, glimmering flakes that danced in the wind. As they stepped down the courthouse stairs, Luke placed a hand on Clara's shoulder. She looked up at him, her eyes tired but steady. Did we lose? She asked softly. No, Luke said. We just started. Rex barked once, sharp and defiant, as if sealing the vow in the cold air. Snow had a way of muting everything in Pine Hollow. Sirens, anger, even hope. But that night, hope whispered again, in the hum of the police station's old heater. Officer Luke Harrison sat at his desk, jacket draped over the back of his chair, the weight of the morning's hearing still sitting heavy in his chest. Outside, the courthouse lights had gone dark, but the echo of Clara's small voice, trembling yet fearless, still lingered in his ears. Across the room, Clara sat on the floor, her coat unbuttoned, feeding baby Ben from a bottle. Her cheeks glowed pink from the cold, but her eyes had a faraway sadness. the kind children shouldn't have to wear. Rex, the German shepherd, lay beside her, his body pressed close to the heater, eyes half shut but alert. Every now and then, he'd glance at Luke as if to say, "We're not done yet." Luke rubbed his temples. "We need proof," he muttered. "Something that ties Veronica and Eli directly." His voice was quiet but sharp, the tone of a man calculating under pressure. At that moment, the door creaked open. A young man stepped inside, snow dripping from his coat sleeves. He couldn't have been older than 22. His clothes were wrinkled, his tie half undone, his brown hair sticking up as if he'd forgotten sleep for days. He carried a messenger bag slung across his chest, clutching it like a lifeline. "Officer Harrison?" the young man asked, breathless. "My name's Daniel Price. I think I have something you need." Luke eyed him cautiously. "You a reporter?" "No, sir," Daniel said quickly. I was Mr. Stone's intern, at least until this morning." Luke leaned back in his chair, studying the boy. Daniel's nervousness wasn't just fear, it was guilt, the kind that came from standing too close to corruption. "What changed this morning?" Luke asked. Daniel hesitated, glancing toward Clara and Rex before answering. "I overheard something. I was filing documents in his office when Mr. Stone got a call from Mrs. Mullins. They didn't know I was there." He put the call on speaker. He swallowed hard. They were laughing, about how easy it was to manipulate the judge, about the money. He said, and I quote, "Once the hearing's over, we'll transfer the kids out of town and no one will ever question a thing." Luke's jaw tightened. "You have proof of that?" Daniel nodded, opening his bag. From inside, he pulled out a small digital recorder. "I recorded the last few minutes before they hung up." For a moment, silence filled the room, punctuated only by the faint hiss of the heater. Luke reached out and took the recorder. His thumb hovered over the play button, but he stopped, his eyes fixed on the boy. "You realize if this is what you say it is, you've just painted a target on your back." Daniel gave a shaky smile. "Yeah, I figured, but someone has to stop. Them." Clara was watching now, her small hand resting on Rex's back. "You're brave," she said softly. Daniel laughed nervously. "Not really, just tired of pretending." Luke pressed play. The static crackled, followed by voices, Eli's smooth, calculated tone, and Veronica's sharp, honeyed laugh. Eli's voice. "The girl's performance was touching, but don't worry. Cartwell's already convinced. By next week, the paperwork will make her legally unfit." Veronica. "Perfect. And once that's settled, we move the assets before anyone can connect the names. How much did you say the insurance transfer was worth?" Eli. "Close to 400,000, enough to retire somewhere warm, away from this frozen rat trap." The recording ended. Luke's expression darkened. "That's enough to put them both behind bars." Martha, who had quietly entered midway through the playback carrying a thermos of coffee, whistled low. "Well, bless the boy's heart. You just brought a gun to a knife fight, son." Daniel exhaled shakily. "They'll figure out I'm the leak soon. I can't go home." Luke nodded, already thinking. "You'll stay here tonight. Rex doesn't take kindly to strangers, but he knows good from bad." Rex wagged his tail once in agreement. Clara smiled faintly, reaching down to pet him. "He likes you," she told Daniel. "That means you're safe." The young man smiled back, a bit of his fear fading. By morning, Luke had already called Sergeant Miller to meet at the station. She arrived in her thick winter coat, steam rising from her travel mug. Her face, as always, looked carved from iron, but when Luke played the recording, her eyebrows shot up. "Well," she said, lowering her voice, "that's the smoking gun we needed, but if we move too fast, they'll claim entrapment. We need the original data files, something signed, something written." "Which means," Luke said grimly, "we go to Eli's office." Miller frowned. "That building's locked tighter than a drum, Luke. He's got the place guarded, security cameras, all that city nonsense." "I'm not asking you to come," Luke replied, "but I have to go." Before she could protest, Martha chimed in from the doorway. "Don't forget, I've still got keys to half the county offices. Eli used to lease a floor from the old courthouse annex. Same master locks as the archives. If you're sneaky and the dog's quiet, you might just pull it off." Rex barked once, as if offended at the implication he couldn't be quiet. By evening, the plan was set. Miller agreed to stall any official orders from Judge Cartwell. Martha would create a distraction outside the annex while Luke and Daniel went inside. Clara, though she begged to help, was told to stay at the station with Rex watching over her and Ben. Before leaving, Luke knelt beside her. "If anything happens, you stay with Rex. He knows what to do." Clara nodded solemnly. "You'll come back?" He smiled softly. "Always." The annex loomed like a forgotten beast at the edge of town, its brick walls scarred by decades of neglect. A single security light flickered over the entrance. The snow had stopped, but the cold was bone deep. Luke and Daniel slipped inside through a side door Martha had unlatched earlier. The air smelled of dust, printer ink, and something faintly chemical. They moved quietly down the hallway, flashlights off, guided only by the dim moonlight leaking through narrow windows. Daniel's hands shook slightly as he unlocked Eli's office with a key Martha had borrowed. The door opened with a soft click. Inside, the room was immaculate. Leather chairs, mahogany desk, shelves lined with law books, and expensive scotch bottles. Luke went straight for the file cabinets while Daniel booted up the computer. "Look for anything labeled Mullins or estate transfer," Luke whispered. Minutes ticked by. The old radiator hissed. Finally, Daniel hissed, "Got it. There's a backup drive, encrypted, but the folder name matches the account number from Martha's papers." "Copy it," Luke said. They had just started when a faint noise echoed from the hall. Footsteps. Luke froze. Daniel's eyes widened. The door handle turned. Without thinking, Luke pulled Daniel behind the desk, motioning for silence. The door creaked open. A beam of light swept across the room. A man's voice muttered, "Stone's going to kill me if I leave the lights off again." It was Tom Reeves, Eli's personal assistant. A tall, broad-shouldered man with thinning blonde hair and the weary look of someone who hated his job but feared losing it more. He wore a cheap security badge and carried a flashlight and thermos. He moved toward the desk, sighing. "Can't even keep the heat on in this damn place." Luke waited until Tom bent down to plug in a heater, then, quick as breath, stepped out from behind the desk. "Evening, Tom." The man froze, eyes wide. "Officer Harrison? What the hell?" "Keep your voice down," Luke warned. "You didn't see us. You don't want to be part of this mess." Tom looked between Luke and Daniel, then at the recorder still open on the desk. His shoulders slumped. "You're taking them down, aren't you?" "That's the plan." A long silence. Then Tom handed over his key ring. "Then hurry." By dawn, Luke and Daniel returned to the station with the flash drive and copies of every fraudulent signature they could find. Clara was awake, sitting beside Rex, eyes wide with relief when they walked in. Luke set the files on his desk, the sun breaking faintly through the frosted glass. "It's over," Daniel whispered. Luke shook his head. "No, it's just beginning." Rex barked once, low, certain, like the sound of a promise being made. Snow had turned to sleet by the time the sun fell behind the hills. The streets of Pine Hollow shimmered under streetlights, each flake catching a glint of orange before melting into the dark. Inside the police station, the air was thick with tension and the faint hum of the coffee machine. Officer Luke Harrison sat hunched over his desk, the small flash drive lying in front of him like a piece of dynamite. It contained everything: the recordings, the bank transfers, the forged signatures. Proof strong enough to shatter everything Eli Stone and Veronica Mullins had built. Across the room, Daniel was typing furiously on an old desktop computer, his face illuminated by the screen. His hands trembled slightly. Whether from cold or nerves, even he didn't know. He'd spent the entire morning decrypting the files from Eli's office, his programming knowledge cobbled together from nights of self-study and boredom during his internship. His fingers moved quickly, occasionally pausing to wipe sweat from his forehead. Clara sat quietly beside Rex, the loyal German shepherd who never strayed far from her side. She had wrapped her small hands around a cup of cocoa that Martha had brought earlier, though it had long since gone cold. Her eyes followed Luke's every move with a quiet understanding beyond her years. Ben, her baby brother, slept in a makeshift crib made of 2 stacked drawers padded with a blanket, breathing softly. "Almost done," Daniel said, glancing at Luke. "Just one more file. I think it's the one that shows the offshore transfers." "Good," Luke replied. "Once we have that, we'll send everything to the State Bureau. They'll have no choice but to open an investigation." Martha, who had dozed off on the bench near the heater, stirred. Her gray hair framed her wrinkled face like a halo of silver. She'd been with them all day, baking cornbread for the kids, making coffee for the adults, and offering advice no one asked for, but everyone needed. "You better move quick, boy," she muttered without opening her eyes. "Men like Eli Stone don't go down easy. They take others with them." Luke didn't answer. He didn't have to. He knew she was right. At that moment, headlights flashed through the frosted windows. A black car pulled into the station lot, followed by a second one. Luke's instincts sharpened immediately. "Daniel," he said lowly, "unplug the system, now." Daniel's fingers fumbled as he yanked the flash drive free just as the front door burst open. Two men entered, one in a trench coat, tall, lean, with slicked back hair, and the other broader, his jaw set like stone. Both wore the stiff posture of men used to being obeyed. "Evening, Officer Harrison," the taller one said. "Detective Raymond Cole, State Internal Affairs. This is my partner, Detective Vance Porter." Cole's eyes were narrow, sharp like polished glass. Porter, slightly younger, had a more rugged look, dark beard, rough hands, and eyes that carried the exhaustion of someone who had seen too much. Luke stood slowly. "What's this about?" Cole pulled out a document from his coat. "We received a complaint this morning. It alleges you're holding minors illegally and interfering with a court order. We're here to review the situation." Luke didn't move. "Who sent it?" Cole's lips curved into a faint smile. "A Mrs. Veronica Mullins. Ring a bell?" Martha muttered a curse under her breath. Clara tensed, clutching Rex's collar. "Look," Luke began, his voice controlled. "These children were abandoned and endangered. I have every right—" Cole raised a hand. "Save it for the Bureau. We're just here to bring them in for a statement." His tone was polite, almost casual, but the glint in his eyes betrayed purpose. Not justice, but performance. Vance Porter, however, didn't seem so sure. He glanced at Clara and Rex, then at the sleeping baby. Something in his face softened. Luke caught it. "You have kids, Detective Porter?" Vance hesitated, then nodded. "Two girls, about her age." "Then you know what this is," Luke said quietly. "You know what it looks like when someone's trying to erase the truth." Cole's expression hardened. "Enough. Hand over the drive, Officer Harrison." Luke's gaze flicked toward Daniel, who slipped the flash drive into his pocket without a sound. Rex growled low, a deep rumble that vibrated through the floor. Clara instinctively placed a hand on his head. Cole took a step forward. "That dog moves again, I'll have animal control here by morning." "Then I'd make sure you move slow," Luke replied evenly. For a tense moment, no one breathed. Snow hissed softly against the windows, the world outside muffled as if holding its breath. Then Vance spoke up. "Ray, maybe we don't need to take the kids tonight. Let's file the report first." Cole shot him a sharp look. "We follow procedure." But before anything more could be said, the phone rang. Luke reached it first. "Pine Hollow PD." A voice crackled through. "Sergeant Miller's." "Luke, you need to get out of there. Now. Eli's filed an injunction against you personally. He's bringing federal marshals by morning. They're calling it obstruction of justice." Luke's pulse quickened. "How long do I have?" "Maybe an hour," she said. "If that." He hung up and turned to the room. "We're leaving." Cole stepped forward. "You're not going anywhere." Luke didn't answer with words. Instead, he flicked the light switch off. The room plunged into darkness, followed by Rex's sudden bark. Loud, sharp, startling. In the chaos, Daniel slipped past the detectives toward the back exit, clutching the flash drive. Cole cursed, fumbling for his flashlight. "Bye." The time the beam cut through the dark, the side door was open, the wind roaring in. "Porter! Outside!" Cole barked, chasing after them. Luke stayed behind just long enough to grab Ben and usher Clara out through the rear. Martha followed, muttering, "Damn fool men and their power games," before slamming the door shut behind them. They piled into Luke's truck, its engine protesting in the cold. Daniel was already inside, shaking but determined. "I hid the drive in my boot," he said quickly. "Even if they stop us, they won't find it." Luke nodded. "Good thinking." Rex jumped into the back, pressing his body protectively against Clara and the baby. As they sped down the snowy road, Pine Hollow blurred behind them. The glowing signs, the silent houses, the courthouse that had once stood as a symbol of order, now just a shadow. They didn't stop until they reached Miller's cabin, deep in the woods on the outskirts of town. The small structure was half buried under snow, smoke curling from the chimney. Miller herself stood at the doorway in her flannel jacket, shotgun slung over her shoulder, her face etched with worry. "You sure you want to do this, Luke?" she asked as they entered. "You're breaking more rules than I can count." "Then I guess we better make it count for something," Luke replied. He laid the baby gently on the couch and turned to Daniel. "We'll get the evidence to the State Bureau in the morning. Once this goes public, Eli and Veronica are finished." Martha poured herself a cup of whiskey from a dusty bottle. "About damn time," she said. Outside, the storm began to rise again, the wind rattling the windows like angry hands. Inside, the group sat in the glow of the fireplace, a strange, fragile family, bound not by blood, but by the will to fight for what was right. Clara leaned her head against Rex, whispering softly, "We're almost safe, right?" Luke looked toward the fire, his face unreadable. "Almost," he said, "but not yet." And in the flickering light, the reflection of the flash drive glimmered, small, silver, and powerful enough to change everything. The wind outside the cabin howled like a wounded animal, dragging snow across the windows in violent streaks. The night was a living thing, restless, unrelenting. Inside, the cabin flickered with the light of a dying fire. The group had gathered around it, wrapped in blankets and exhaustion. Sergeant Miller sat at the table, dismantling her shotgun with practiced precision, her brow furrowed in thought. The rhythmic click of metal was the only sound breaking the heavy silence. Officer Luke Harrison stood by the window, one hand resting on the sill, his eyes scanning the endless white outside. His reflection in the glass looked older than he remembered, lines carved deep around his eyes, weariness sitting heavy in his shoulders. He had faced criminals and chaos before, but what haunted him now wasn't fear of losing a case. It was the thought of losing the fragile family that had somehow fallen into his care. At his feet, Rex, the German shepherd, lay with his head resting between his paws, alert but still. The firelight glinted off his sable fur, highlighting the pale scars that ran across his flank, remnants of his years as a police K-9. He was 8 now, his muzzle beginning to gray, but his gaze remained sharp, intelligent, and loyal. Every few minutes, his ears twitched, catching sounds beyond human reach, the crunch of branches, the distant hum of an approaching vehicle, perhaps. Clara sat cross-legged beside the hearth, softly humming to her baby brother Ben, who slept bundled in a wool blanket. The song was off-key and quiet, but soothing. Something her mother used to sing, she said. The little girl's red birthmark glowed faintly in the orange firelight, a streak of courage across a face far too young for the burdens it carried. Across the room, Daniel Price sat at Miller's laptop, typing with quick, steady fingers. His exhaustion was obvious. Dark circles shadowed his eyes, his knuckles raw from gripping cold metal during their escape. Yet, his resolve had hardened. He had decrypted the last of Eli's files, and what he found chilled him more than the storm outside. He looked up, his voice low. "There's more. A transfer log showing Eli received money from an offshore account last month, signed under Veronica's maiden name. It matches the insurance payout from Clara's mother's death." Miller froze mid-motion. "You're saying the fire wasn't an accident?" Daniel nodded grimly. "They staged it. There's a digital trail, fake maintenance reports, doctored inspections. Evelyn Mullins didn't just die in a fire, she was silenced." Luke turned from the window, his expression darkening. "And Clara's the heir to everything her mother left behind." Martha, who had been half dozing in a chair, opened one eye and muttered, "The devil always tidies up after himself, but he leaves footprints in the snow." She poured herself a cup of whiskey and sipped. "Guess it's time we show folks where those footprints lead." Luke leaned over the table, his voice steady but sharp. "We'll send the data to the state office first thing at dawn. Once they trace the accounts, it's over." But as he spoke, the radio crackled to life, a faint voice breaking through the static. Miller frowned and twisted the dial. "It's the sheriff's frequency," she said. A burst of static, then a strained male voice. "Storm damage on Route 6. Roadblocks down. 2 black sedans heading north. Unmarked. Repeat, unmarked vehicles." Luke's stomach turned. "They found us." Miller snapped the radio off. "We have to move, now." Clara looked up, eyes wide. "But the storm?" "It's safer than waiting here," Luke said, already pulling on his coat. "Pack what you can." Within minutes, the cabin was a flurry of movement. Daniel backed up the files onto a second flash drive and tucked it into the lining of his jacket. Martha bundled the baby, muttering under her breath about fools chasing justice through blizzards. Miller loaded her shotgun and handed Luke a revolver. "If they corner us, you don't wait for backup." The wind hit them like a wall as they stepped outside. Snow whipped against their faces, visibility barely stretching beyond a few feet. The headlights of the old police truck cut 2 narrow beams through the dark, carving a path through the forest road. Clara sat in the back seat, holding Ben close. Rex was beside her, pressed against her legs, his fur dusted with flakes. The rhythmic sound of the windshield wipers was the only thing breaking the silence. After several miles, the radio crackled again. This time, a new voice. Male, calm, deliberate. "You can't hide forever, Officer Harrison." Luke's hands tightened on the steering wheel. He recognized that voice. Eli Stone. "Turn yourself in, bring the files, and I'll forget the rest. Don't make this harder than it needs to be," the voice continued. Daniel's face drained of color. "He's tracking the signal. He's patched into the old sheriff's frequency." Martha crossed herself. "Lord have mercy, the man's everywhere." Luke exhaled, forcing calm into his voice. "Let him talk." He pressed the transmit button. "You're running out of options, Eli. The Bureau will have everything by morning." A dry chuckle came through. "You really think they'll believe a small-town cop and a runaway intern over me? You don't understand how this works, Luke. I own the people who write the law." Then silence. The radio went dead. A mile later, the truck's headlights caught movement, a fallen tree across the road. Miller cursed. "We're boxed in." Luke stopped the truck, scanning the tree line. "Everyone out. Move fast. Stay low." As they climbed out, the woods exploded with light. Flashlights, headlights, and the echo of boots crunching snow. Shadows moved between the trees. "Down!" Luke shouted, pulling Clara behind the truck. Martha clutched Ben, crouching low as Rex growled deep in his throat, teeth bared. A voice called out through the storm. "Luke, let's not do this the hard way." It wasn't Eli. It was Detective Raymond Cole. His silhouette appeared through the haze, gun drawn. Behind him, several men fanned out. Not police, but private security. Their uniforms were mismatched, their movements too organized for local officers. Miller whispered, "They're mercs." Luke's voice was steady. "You're working for Eli now?" Cole's tone was smooth but strained. "You don't get it. The man's untouchable. Walk away, Harrison. Take the kids. Disappear. Pretend you never found the files." Daniel stepped forward, trembling but defiant. "You think he'll let us live if we do that?" Cole's face twitched. Guilt, maybe. Then his jaw hardened. "Last chance!" Rex barked suddenly, sharp, thunderous. In the next instant, the woods erupted. A gunshot cracked the silence, then another. Luke grabbed Clara, shoving her toward the ditch. Bullets hissed past like angry insects, kicking up snow. Martha shouted, "Go, I'll cover you," and fired Miller's shotgun toward the lights, the recoil nearly knocking her down. Luke fired back, his revolver barking into the dark. Rex lunged at one of the mercenaries who tried to flank them, dragging the man down in a flurry of snow and snarls. Through the chaos, Miller grabbed Daniel's arm. "The files! Get them to the Bureau! Go!" Daniel hesitated, looking back at Clara. "I'll come back," he promised, then ran into the woods, snow swallowing his tracks. The fight lasted less than 2 minutes, but it felt endless. When the last gunshot faded, the forest fell eerily quiet. Cole was gone, retreating with his men. Luke crouched beside Rex, checking him for wounds. The dog's fur was matted with snow, but he was unhurt, breathing hard, eyes bright. Martha stumbled over, her hat missing, hair wild in the wind. "Well," she rasped, "if that don't wake the dead, nothing will." Luke managed a grim smile. "You all right?" "Still got all my parts. Can't say the same for my hearing." He turned to Clara, who clung to him with trembling hands. "You did good," he said softly. "You were brave." She nodded, eyes glistening. "Will Daniel be okay?" Luke looked toward the dark line of trees. "He will," he said, though the doubt in his voice betrayed him. The snow kept falling, covering the blood, the footprints, the chaos. And as dawn's faint light began to break over Pine Hollow, Luke realized something. The storm wasn't ending. It was only changing shape. Dawn came slowly over Pine Hollow, the sky bruised in shades of lavender and gray. The storm had passed, leaving behind a silence so deep it seemed sacred. Snow lay thick across the valley, softening the scars of the night before. Smoke curled faintly from Miller's cabin, a fragile sign of life against the frozen wilderness. Inside, the fire had burned low, its embers glowing like the last heartbeat of a long night. Officer Luke Harrison sat beside the window, one arm bandaged, his uniform torn and dusted with soot. His eyes were hollow but alert, watching the sun crawl over the horizon. His mind replayed the chaos again and again. Gunfire in the snow, Daniel's promise before disappearing into the woods, Cole's retreating figure, the echo of Eli's voice through the radio. He had seen wars of men before, but this was a war for innocence itself. On the couch, Clara slept curled up with her baby brother Ben, her small body wrapped in Rex's thick fur. The German shepherd lay protectively beside her, his flank rising and falling with steady breaths. A faint scratch marked his ear, a memory of the night's battle, but his calm, vigilant eyes betrayed no pain. At 8 years old, Rex had become more than a dog. He was the thread holding their fragile world together. Martha sat by the stove, stirring a pot of thin oatmeal. Her face looked older in the pale light, lines carved deep by years of stubborn kindness. Her right hand trembled faintly as she lifted the ladle, an old injury from factory work decades ago that flared in the cold. Yet her spirit remained unbroken. "Food's ready," she said, her voice hoarse but warm. "It won't win any prizes, but it'll keep you standing." Sergeant Miller, still in her flannel coat, checked her phone for the 100th time, frustration etched on her face. "No signal," she muttered. "The storm knocked down the towers. We'll have to drive into town to send the files." Luke nodded slowly. "If Daniel made it out, he's already on his way to the bureau." Clara stirred at the mention of Daniel's name, her eyes fluttering open. "He said he'd come back," she murmured sleepily. "He will," Luke said softly. He wanted to believe it, needed to believe it. Hours passed before they were ready to move. The snow was waist-deep in places, and the truck's tires groaned against the ice. Miller drove while Luke sat beside her, scanning the forest road. The world around them looked almost peaceful now, untouched, as though the violence of the night before had been swallowed whole by the snow. Halfway to town, they saw movement ahead. A figure stumbling through the drifts, waving weakly. Luke's heart leapt. "Stop the truck!" It was Daniel. His clothes were soaked, his hair plastered to his forehead, but in his hand he still clutched the flash drive. When they reached him, he collapsed into Luke's arms, breathless but grinning. "I made it!" he gasped. "They tried to cut me off, but Rex's GPS tracker, it helped me find my way back." Martha snorted from the back seat. "See? Smart dog, smarter than most men I know." Back at the station, the building stood half buried under snow. The power was out, but the emergency generator hummed faintly. Luke moved quickly, plugging the flash drive into the last working computer. The screen flickered to life. Eli's files, the bank records, the confession. Everything. "Once we send this," Miller said, "they'll have no way to hide." But as Luke prepared to upload the data, the front door burst open. A cold gust swept through the room, carrying with it the scent of cologne and gunpowder. Eli Stone stood there, dressed in a dark overcoat, snow melting on his shoulders. His hair, once sleek and perfect, now clung to his forehead in damp strands. His eyes, once charming, calculated, burned with a feverish light. He was no longer the man of control and confidence. He was a cornered predator. Behind him stood Detective Raymond Cole, face pale, his gun lowered. His expression carried something close to shame. "Step away from the computer, Harrison," Eli said, voice low but trembling. "You have no idea what you're doing." "I know exactly what I'm doing," Luke replied, finishing what Evelyn Mullins started. At the name, something flickered in Eli's gaze. Regret, maybe, or the ghost of fear. "You think this will change anything? The system will bury it. You'll lose your badge, your life, and those kids will end up back in the gutter." Luke didn't answer. Instead, he turned the laptop toward him. The upload bar blinked, 95%. Eli's hand shot forward, gun raised. But before he could fire, Rex lunged, a blur of motion and fury. The gun went off, the sound deafening in the small room. The bullet missed Luke, splintering the window. Rex clamped down on Eli's arm, dragging him to the ground. "Rex!" Clara cried. Eli roared, kicking wildly, but the dog held fast. Luke grabbed his sidearm and leveled it at Eli. "It's over." For a moment time froze. Snow swirling through the shattered glass, breath fogging in the cold air, the upload bar flashing 100%. Cole took a slow step forward, eyes on Luke. "The Bureau has it now," he said softly. "They'll see the truth." Eli slumped back, defeated, clutching his bleeding arm. The arrogance drained from his face, leaving behind only exhaustion and bitterness. "You think you've won?" he spat. "There's always another Eli Stone waiting behind the next door." Luke lowered his weapon. "Then we'll keep knocking." Cole holstered his gun and turned to Luke. "You'll want to get those kids somewhere safe. I'll stay until the feds arrive." His voice cracked slightly. "I owe you that much." Outside, sirens echoed faintly in the distance. Not Eli's men this time, but real law enforcement. The sound grew louder until the first black SUV rolled into the lot. The agents moved fast, securing the building, escorting Eli and Veronica Mullins, found hiding nearby, into custody. Hours later, the station was quiet again. The chaos had passed, replaced by a fragile calm. Miller leaned against the wall, rubbing her temples. "We'll need statements, reports, Lord knows, paperwork will kill me before retirement." Martha chuckled, passing her a cup of coffee. "At least it's a good ending for once." Clara stood near the window, watching the snow fall. Her breath fogged the glass, tracing tiny shapes with her fingertip. Rex sat beside her, tail thumping softly. When Luke approached, she looked up at him. "Is it really over?" He smiled, tired, genuine. "Yeah, it's over." "But Mom," Clara's voice faltered. "She's still gone." Luke knelt beside her, resting a hand on her shoulder. "She's gone," he said gently. "But what she left, you, Ben, her kindness, that's still here. You made sure of it." Clara smiled faintly, pressing her forehead against Rex's fur. "Then I guess she's not really gone." Later that evening, the sun dipped low over Pine Hollow, turning the snow to gold. The small town, scarred by greed and cruelty, began to breathe again. Inside the station, laughter replaced silence. Miller arguing with Martha over burnt toast, Daniel teasing Rex about his hero medal made of a bottle cap, Clara humming softly while feeding Ben. Luke stepped outside for a moment, the cold air biting his skin. He looked toward the hills, where the last light of day glowed faintly against the horizon. Somewhere deep inside, the ache that had haunted him for years finally began to ease. Behind him, Clara's voice rang out. "Come on, Luke, dinner's ready." He turned, smiling. "On my way." As he closed the door, the wind carried a final whisper through the snow, faint but unmistakable, as if the town itself exhaled in relief. And for the first time in a long time, Pine Hollow slept in peace. In the end, this story reminds us that miracles do not always arrive in thunder or light. They often come quietly, through kindness, through courage, through the love that refuses to break. Just like Clara, who found family where the world gave her none, we are never truly alone. God's grace moves through people, through moments, through second chances. In our daily lives, we may not always see the miracle right away, but every act of compassion, every time we choose to forgive, every time we protect the innocent, we become part of it. If this story touched your heart, Share it with someone who needs a little hope today. Comment below and tell us your thoughts. And if you believe in the power of God's miracles, type Amen in the comments. Don't forget to subscribe to this channel for more stories of faith, love, and redemption. May God bless you, guide your path, and fill your life with peace and grace.